Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have your attention, please put on your headphones so you could hear me. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back to the Ocean Pavilion and to see many friends in the auditorium. This is an event that is titled Bridging Ocean and Freshwater Challenges Through Collective Science, Industry, and Policy Action. I will say a little bit more about that before I invite our first speaker, but the meeting is organized by Plymouth Marine Laboratory, the Action Platform for Source-to-Sea Management, CV, Stockholm International Water Institute, is that, did I say it right? Good. And Royal Van Ord. And of course, it's our pleasure to invite all these organizers to the Ocean Pavilion. We had done this in Dubai for the first time, and we thought that it went so well that we should have a repeat of it here. But what you would be pleased to know is that the connection between what we see as the freshwater and the saltwater in terms of two regimes, trying to see what the meeting points are and how we can make the most of it, is something that is now reflected across the board in lots of different meetings taking place in not only here in the Ocean Pavilion, but across many other pavilions and also in the discussions that are taking place more broadly, which is about connecting the different tracks, themes, conventions, whatever you want to call it, and trying to find the common ground. The general sentiment is the era of living in your own silo and dealing with matters as if they don't have any connections with others, if not gone, is at least close to being broken down so that we see what it means to work with each other. The main theme of this particular session, we are trying to understand and deepen that understanding of the work being carried out by both communities, freshwater and the ocean, and recognize the challenges for the communities and the opportunities of communities to work together. And there are a number of other items as well, but I do not want to go into that because these are the items that the speakers are going to speak. But I just want to say that this event very closely parallels a number of other events. There is another event that talks about Rio Trio, that is tomorrow, that the UNFCCC is organizing. And there is tomorrow in the evening, we have an event as an official side event of One Ocean, 3 COPs. And so you get the picture. The sentiment is how can we work together? And all these parallel decisions taken in Dubai, first about creating a new troika between COPs, Dubai, Baku, and Belém, and I hope that that will continue. There is also a decision by the COP presidencies, G20, G7, and across a number of other international institutions to also try to work together on the intersection between these various issues. So it is really great that we are here to talk about the freshwater and the ocean and the connection that is there. It's my great pleasure to invite Ambassador Peter Thompson, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean, to deliver his high-level address to kick us off on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rama, and thank you to Woods Hole Institute for all it's doing and hosting us here in this pavilion. Rama very correctly pointed out that everything is connected, and that may sound like an aphorism, but we too often get ourselves into silos. And he was referring to the 3 Rio conventions and how we've got to bring those together more effectively. We also got to bring together our thinking about freshwater and saltwater. And I don't know if Ramsar is in the room, but no, they're not. Okay, but it would be good if they were involved in this conversation going forward, because of course Ramsar is that meeting point between salt and fresh water. You know, I come from a town called Suva in Fiji, and I want you to just think about, and I'm going to tell you this because I got the hydrological cycle and source to sea. I got it when I was in primary school, and it's just so obvious, but it's so often ignored. For my hometown, think about sort of high mountain ridge behind the harbor, southeast trades coming in every day across, 4,000 miles of open ocean. So walking to school in the morning, blue skies, typical day, blue skies. By the time you got to school, there was puffy cumulus clouds starting to form. By lunchtime, if you looked out your classroom window, you could see that the cumulus clouds were big now, and they're moving like battleships across the harbor and just banking up against the mountain. And by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, tropical downpour. Why? Condensation, right? So you had the evaporation from the sea, condensation in the clouds, hitting the mountain, and down comes precipitation. So that cycle was observable every day. And of course, when that precipitation happened up there on the mountains, if you've ever seen a tropical rainstorm, you know what I mean. It's just torrents of rain coming down out of the sky, and torrents coming down through the ravines and the valleys and down the drains of the town, and all ending up back in the ocean again, where the water came from in the morning. So you could just see that hydrological cycle happening every day. The tragedy of it, of course, is that in natural times that was all fine, but with urban development, of course, and with our agricultural and industrial development around the capital city, Suva, where I was from, what goes back with the water into the ocean is not what nature intended. You know, it's plastics, it's medicines, it's chemicals, it's the tar off the road from the tires, it's all that detritus that humanity produces just ends back in the ocean. And we all know now what the effects of all that are, and that, it's coming back to us in the fish that we eat. So understanding that hydrological cycle, absolutely important. It's led us, of course, to the negotiation of a plastics treaty, which hopefully in Busan will get there end of this month. Really important that everybody understands the full cycle of plastics, that it's not just about stopping that plastic getting into the ocean, but that it's that we deal with the upstream as well. I also want to bring your attention, when we think about this, to the Back to Blue initiative that The Economist Impact has put together and will be featuring in the World Ocean Summit in March in Tokyo next year. Back to Blue is all about the chemical pollution of the ocean that we are subjecting the ocean and its coastal ecosystems to. So that will be obviously a big topic at the UN Ocean Conference. There's an Ocean Action Panel which specifically deals with this at the UN Ocean Conference. So please put your attention and thoughts to that. And can I just make a little advertisement for the UN Ocean Conference, because you're all ocean stakeholders. If you are passionate about source to sea and about pollution of coastal ecosystems, the co-facilitators of the political declaration, which will be adopted at the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, they have just put it. I only received this today, and unfortunately the deadline is November the 29th. The co-facilitators, who are the Australian PR and the Cabo Verde PR in New York, have asked for input from stakeholders. That's all of us. And they're going to obviously use the best of that to put it into their draft declaration, which they're then going to socialize with the member states and produce something by April next year. So I do hope that outcome from this meeting today will find its way to those co-facilitators. I think the source to sea ethos is absolutely essential to everything we're doing for SDG 14. It's at the basis. When you look at food supplies or when you look at ecosystems, it's there at the heart of it. I just want to say that, as that Suva schoolboy who I started out talking about, one of the things that occurred to me as just a young boy, I always thought that all the energy should come from the ocean. You only have to get caught in a rip when the tide's going out in a coral lagoon to know the force of the ocean. And I've always thought that the ocean is quite sufficient for all the power that we need if we can only think about how to harness that power properly. And of course that's renewable. But I also thought that we should never run out of water on this planet. When you think that there's this vast reservoir of H2O out there in the sea, and if we could only get to desalination, I know it's not a keen thing for a lot of people, but we've got to think it through. We've got to think about new ways of doing it, innovating. Desalination based entirely on renewable energy, utilizing all the byproducts in a sustainable way. You know, the byproducts, of course, heat of water and saline solutions. Even as a small boy sitting on the seawall in the Suva, I was thinking, there's got to be a way that we can use the salt water for people to drink and for their agriculture and all the rest. So I leave you with those thoughts. You've got a more sensible panel here than an opening speaker, so very keen to listen to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the inspiring remarks and the connections that you make, both from what is happening in the real world and from your own personal reflections. I'm also particularly glad that you talked about the Economist's Back to Blue initiative, and that is probably most appropriate for this panel. And we have 4 speakers, and each of them are going to speak for up to a maximum of 5 minutes, so we can have a discussion afterwards amongst us, and then also open it up for Q&A from the audience. So let me invite all of them I'll announce the names, and so I don't have to keep interrupting and coming back to say, you know, who is going to be next. Our first speaker is Viviana Franco. She's the Sustainability Project Lead at Van Oord. And next is Matthew Frost, head of the International Office of the Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and a longtime collaborator and colleague in so many other things that we do at the Ocean Pavilion. And the third speaker is Tove Lexen, a policy advisor on climate change at WaterAid Sweden. And the last speaker is Thomas Ribermark, director of the Swedish Water House. So in that order, if you could kindly come to the podium and speak. Thank you very much. Are from where you are sitting. Thank you.
Can you hear me all? I hope you can hear me. I think before the questions that are going to be asked by Dr. Rama, I would like to introduce what we do at Van Oord. So we are a marine contractor with over 150 years of experience in the oceans, but also in the rivers. We started collaborating with multiple stakeholders, and we are present in multiple countries. We have a presence in the offshore energy industry, but also in the dredging industry, and we are supporting countries where they have challenges on adaptation, resilience. So. In that way, we are collaborating, but more on this setting the scene. And I really like that we are here also with Thomas. As Van Oord, we started collaborating with the Water Pavilion. The first time that the Water Pavilion took place at COP27. And the reason why we started collaborating with the Water Pavilion, although we are not intrinsically working in freshwater, was because we really think that the systems thinking that are mentioned by Peter and also for you, Dr. Rama, are the way that we need to move forward. And I'm really happy that we have this panel where we have different expertise and we can really share some thoughts on how we can really move forward and collaborate and implementing towards our roadmap to COP30.
Hi, yeah, so as Rama says, I'm Matt Frost, Plymouth Marine Laboratory. In a little while, I'll wait for Rama to sort of put the question to us, but I'm going to be talking a bit more on the research and the academic side. But from my point of view, this is really important tying all of this together. I love what Peter and Rama both said about the the increasing move to break down silos, like between conventions, between meetings, between sectors. But there are also other silos that exist, and that's what I'm going to get into in a little while, because we have to remember a lot of this is historical and structural, and when you talk about research institutes, universities, the way they're developed, there are a lot of these silos that have existed for many years. And one of the things that we do at Plymouth Marine Laboratory is we really focus on bringing lots of people together from across different disciplines, different skill sets, different sectors. And I would really just like to echo what Rama said. I think the days of siloed thinking and siloed working, maybe, like you said, not over, but they're definitely on the way out. The idea of a scientist or a policymaker just spending their whole career working in a single field, focusing on a single question, I think those days are long gone. And the exciting thing about this event is, we're bringing people together across sectors. And as I said, I see it in the research area in particular, but perhaps I'll come back to that when we get onto the questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Tove Lexén, and I'm the Climate Policy Advisor at WaterAid Sweden. And for those who don't know, WaterAid is a global federation working with providing people access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. We have about 26 countries where we work across Africa, Asia, the Pacific, South America, and North America as well. And some of those countries are also island countries in the Pacific, for instance, and Madagascar as well. Working particularly with climate and with water, of course, we see the importance of looking at it across the different sectors, and or water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructure is very impacted by climate change, and that is both from the ocean and from drought or heavy rain and so on. So of course it's really important to be able to speak about it across, and we also work at the nation level with trying to influence the national adaptation plans and the nationally determined contributions. And of course that's a process where it's important to see the different cross-sectorial angles as well. And I myself also following very closely the global goal on adaptation and the indicator development for the water and sanitation target. And there, of course, it's again very important to see the across the different targets and the indicators to actually come up with something that is possible to implement in a good way. I will stop there and I go into more answers later.
Thank you, Tove. And I'm Thomas Rebmark, as you heard, from CV, or Stockholm International Water Institute. And Stockholm International Water Institute works, we are conveners and facilitators of the Water for Climate Pavilion. Some of you might have heard of the World Water Week that is held in Stockholm the last week in August on an annual basis, where we bring together water and climate community. And I must say that we have had some of the source to sea and the ocean more and more throughout the years now, since we've been working more hand in hand as well, which I think is good, but we can have even further. We can develop that even further, definitely. So we're an organization working as a foundation, we're a foundation working within policy advocacy around water-related issues, also very much connected to climate, as I said. So with that, I hand over the mic to. We're going back to you.
Keen panel that is more interested in the dialogue amongst them and the Q&A from you, because normally when I say you have up to 5 minutes, I have to remind them that they exceeded 5 and now are at 6 and 7, but then that was not the case. So I'm grateful to you for that. And also, the panel, as PML had put together here, it reflects really the title, science, industry, and policy, and the interactions, both by the government and the civil society. And given all that, the question to the panel as a whole, if you could kindly reflect on it, is it is there a challenge? I mean, but why are we not doing it already? What are the challenges and what are the opportunities for these two communities to work together, to be of service to both meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have these very clearly laid out, and particularly in terms of leaving no one behind. Who would like to start?
Thank you for the question. And yeah, I would like to start. I'm representing the industry, and we have been present since COP26, and we have a clear message to deliver on. We have more than 100 years of experience on providing solutions to climate, to global challenges. So I would like to emphasize in 3 points that we see as an industry that are challenges that we face nowadays to really go into implementation of those solutions that we can provide as a private sector. The first one is it's really into the regulations and all the policies that are really not aligned to work in such a way that is from source to sea. So we don't see it as an industry that's actually in place to facilitate communication. I think this is we are breaking that barrier at the moment when we are really coming together and working in both sectors, but also not only communication barriers between sectors, but also between the academia, the industry, the policy, how we can really talk the same language. And I think that's a challenge that we face as an industry. And finally, which is not new for, I guess, none of you, but the funding mechanisms, how these financing mechanisms are in place and how we can get access to those. I think it's a challenge to really move forward. Why we are not really working already on a project, on supporting a small island state. I think that's those elements I would like to bring in terms of challenges. Opportunities, I think we can discuss later. But Matt, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll take the same approach. I'll outline the challenges and come back to the opportunities in a moment. But to go back to what I was saying, it's you've got two levels in this in breaking down the silos. You've got the top down, which have already been mentioned, and that's really the policy level, it's the conventions, it's the governance of that. We forget, you look at the UN architecture and other things, all of that has its own silos that develop. We need to break it down. But I'm really interested in also that bottom up. And one of the big challenges in research institutes and academia, as I said, is the history. So for many, many years, you trained as a marine scientist, or you trained as a terrestrial ecologist or a freshwater biologist, and it hasn't been normal to be trained, to work with other people. You go into your field and that's how you do it. And actually, one of the great things that's happened in recent years is we've had an expansion of higher education, both in the UK and the US, but across the world, getting more and more people into university and research structures and things like that. But also what's happened is we've become more and more specialized. And I remember when I was a graduate, you were still expected to come and you had your subject and you could pretty much read a lot of what was on your subject. You can't do that now. Every subject is so specialized. And if you think about scientific journals, I mean, when it comes down to it, we all publish in journals. That's where most of the scientific knowledge goes. And there are some aquatic journals. There are a few journals that try and break down these. But actually, the majority of journals now are so precise and so specialist. And they're on marine phytoplankton, and they're on aquatic, they're on lakes or ponds or whatever. And these are some of the bottom-up structural challenges that we really need to break down if we're actually going to start working together. Because, as I said, you've got the top-down element, you've got the horizontal element Viviane has mentioned, policy, academia, but that bottom-up element of actually training people, and this is where that capacity development comes in as well, and equity, because we need to train people that they're prepared to come into this conversation with at least the knowledge of how all these things connect. And I'll say one more final thing. I lecture on a master's course at the university, And it's incredible how narrow focused most of the students are. They're absolutely brilliant in their subject, and they'll talk to me about marine modeling till the cows come home. But if I talk about policy, they look at me a little bit blank. If I talk about this source to sea approach, they look even blanker. So we've got a job to do with some of that bottom-up restructuring if we're going to really meet these problems head on. So.
Well, I mean, no, there is a microphone there, so that's okay. So, but the question is, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is the curse of the academe. In terms of getting a tenure, you need to be a specialist in a particular field and publish in that field, etc. But in terms of industry or in terms of the NGOs, the permitting process that countries follow to allow any activity has to engage all these parts, right? I mean, they're not looking for a particular specialist, but it is in terms of what the emissions are, where they're going, and how do you keep track of it in terms of the pollution that it causes, etc. So, I mean, do you feel equally constrained that we don't have subject specialists that cut across to advise these regulatory agencies before they're able to decide on what needs to be done and how?
Thank you for that question, and I think it was really good that you went before me as well, because I think it ties together. And I was going to say, actually, also what you said. I think there are several silos that exist. It's the administrative kind of sectoring with laws and regulations for different purposes. It's the sector-wise, and it's also the stakeholder-wise. And I think in that regard, when it comes to the NGOs, they are sometimes not considered as important or as serious or as informed. And I think in this regard, and speaking about also connecting the different levels, it's also important to assess what kind of knowledge is valued, and how do we value knowledge. Of course, indigenous people's knowledge as well is super important to highlight here, and it's a good complement, I think, to research as well. And I think when it comes to NGOs, it's not only about how we value the knowledge or the expertise from these actors, but it's also about providing the ability to participate in different consultations and meetings and so on. And there I would also like to highlight that inclusion is also about much more than just inviting someone to participate. You also need to provide the fundamentals for someone to do so, including financial support to be there, be aware of different societal norms like gender structures or other hierarchical norms that also can inhibit people from participating. But I would also say that NGOs, in my experience, and of course NGOs is a very broad spectra as well. You have the very global ones, and you have the ones that are very connected to the local communities, or that constitute the local communities. But in my experience, a lot of NGOs that are environmental NGOs, they also work across a quite broad spectra of issues. They don't stop with just freshwater or ocean or forest. At least where I come from, it's usually environmental NGOs that work with broader issues, and then it's also that kind of connecting knowledge that can exist within the NGOs themselves as well.
Thank you. Alexander?
Thomas.
No, sorry.
No worries. I'm here. So I'm going back to what Peter Thompson started with, and thank you for sharing that personal perspective. But I lost myself a little bit in the first question, because you stole my tagline. The hydrological cycle, I think that is, or as we like to call it in memory of late Professor Malin Falkenmark, the bloodstream of our planet. I think that's a reason enough for us to work together and have the holistic perspective on ocean and freshwater, and see it as one system. So going back to the question about where the barriers are, I would just reiterate and say that fundamentally it's caused by government structures that is often are too fragmented to achieve sustainable development, and decisions in place can have serious and unintended impacts elsewhere, such as when waste or chemicals are infused by the industry or farming pollutions and polluting rivers, and then subsequently into ocean. So I think we need to have a little perspective, and as policy influencers, we also have we are also accountable for actually influencing the decision makers, and maybe we haven't done our homework properly together with science, together with private sector and other and NGOs, in terms of actually raising the question and raising the bar on the holistic perspective. So I think also, if I may add a little personal perspective, since Peter Thompson, you open up Pandora's box, I think to me silos is a state of mind, and I would encourage, I will encourage here and now the various water communities to actually start talking to each other and find and seek those general or holistic perspectives in a much more engaged and collective action-seeking way than we are today. So by here and now, I invite you all from the ocean community to come and join us in the Water for Climate Pavilion, and I will make sure that my colleagues are coming here and also work together on different conferences. And as we know, the Rio Declaration and the 3 different COPs that are now taking place, let's work together on how we can approach that and also influence the decision makers forward.
Right, thank you very much, Thomas, for that. And I mean, clearly, more back and forth, more conversations is the first step. But we need to make even a more powerful case as to what are the benefits. Why should we do it? I mean, it's not just about exchanging views, but how does that serve the broader purpose of meeting the Sustainable Development Goals? Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on the benefits of that collaboration?
Yeah, I would say that the benefits are that we linkage the source to sea sort of continuum in terms of land, water, delta, estuary, coast, nearshore, ocean ecosystems. I think we heard it in the keynote here in the beginning. So I think that is what I would like to stop with. I don't want to use too many words in this. I think we need to be also very clear and concise in what the benefits are, and they are based on the hydrological cycle, and that provides ecosystems, services, that provides human health, it provides biodiversity, etc. So
right.
I think that would be my response to that question.
Thank you. Tove?
Yes, I think it was interesting that Peter Thompson also mentioned the Rio Conventions, because I think one of the benefits, if we find these solutions that goes across different sectors, we can actually complete different frameworks at the same time with the same action, and I think that's really what we should try to do. So I think that's a clear benefit. If we can identify the solutions with maximum impact for various things that we have to do, that we have committed to do as countries, that's very beneficial for everyone, really.
Would you like to add to that, or should I go to Matt for his grand response?
I will, from our perspective as an industry, I think going back into the benefits, I think by sharing data, and also was mentioned by you, Peter Thompson, about the UN Ocean Decade, and about how also corporate and different organizations are sharing data. So we are part of the corporate data group, and I think by sharing that data that is also used by scientists, then we are also really going through different challenges into scientists, and then of course influencing policy based on those statements that we can find from that. So I think also benefits like having public-private partnerships, and that's also going a little bit more into the field, so how we can do it in the field. Like for example, people in this panel, we can have a partnership, of course. And then I really like what you mentioned about the ecosystem services, because at the end, everything is interconnected. So for example, as Vanor, we have projects on mangrove restoration, but then how we can maybe connect also wetlands. And then we make all the system and the ecosystem services that we have can also make us a business case out of it. So then we are really tackling all different challenges in once by thinking not in silos. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I'm going to comment on the benefits and sort of some of the opportunities as well, because I mean, the way I see it, the benefits bringing this together, it starts to make the funders, and this is research funders and others, realize that their funding model has to change as well. So one of the things that's happened in the UK is we've now, that the funders realize that we can't all work in our solos, so they've started to put out funding calls now, and this is government departments and research councils, that mandate you only get the funding if it's a transdisciplinary cross-sector project. So they're saying this big block of funding won't just fund somebody to do their little siloed research. You have to demonstrate you're working across the board. So that's really nice, and that's kind of a benefit from all of this, is that it's starting to feed up to those funders now, because ultimately I think we'd all agree that if you don't have money to do all of this, that's where it falls down. And I think the other thing it's doing is it's bringing together the different communities. So another area where we've seen a benefit of this approach is in monitoring. So I used to run something called the Marine Environmental Change Network, which brought together all the UK monitoring programs, or marine monitoring programs. I didn't realize till I'd been running it for about 3 years that there was an environmental change network, which was the freshwater equivalent. I didn't know there was one, but they'd taken the same name and set up their own thing. So we started to talk to each other, and we realized that there were a lot of ways to save resource and actually to utilize data much better if we actually started to try and combine these networks. So they were monitoring upland streams, they were monitoring estuaries and rivers, we were monitoring the coast and open ocean. So we actually had a big meeting in London where we got the two communities together for the first time, and that came out of this trying to break down the siloed thinking. So I think the other benefit is it goes much way beyond our sectors, because that thinking then starts to feed into these different communities, in this case, for example, the monitoring community.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for that. I mean, we sort of intuitively know the connection between the two. But what the panel has told us is more precisely, what that connection is and why we should do it, and the time to do it is now. Of course, we are meeting in the context of the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Convention. What do these conclusions mean for climate? You mentioned about NDCs, so okay, how do we factor this in, and what sort of support is needed for the countries to include this connection in the NDCs, and any elaboration of that I think would be very helpful.
Sorry, I lost the sound a little bit here. So
I said, now that we know the benefits of working together between the source to sea aspects of it, given the context we are in, the climate COP, how do those benefits translate to meeting the climate goals, and what do countries need to do to include this in their NDCs?
that was several questions and deep ones. Thank you. I think what the G70 leaders said today, that they don't want the negotiators from those countries to come back without having a deal around the financing mechanism, but also the NDCs and the NAPs. I think that's what we need. We need countries to align around mutual agreements and bold decisions. When it comes to the source-to-sea perspective, I think we can. There is ecosystem benefits, there is health benefits, there's benefits that we that we, from a climate pollution or emission perspective, can benefit from. So we have all the arguments, we know the details, we have the data, we just need to combine them. And I think if we could get support from what is now negotiated here in the NDCs and the NAPs, okay, also bringing water, not only the water that is floating in streams, into these plans and commitments, and then I think we can take a huge step forward. And I would encourage, also looking forward to the water conference in UAE in 2026, to maybe try to bring in the ocean perspective a little bit further as well. I'm saying that without having any mandate or any, but that's an idea that is floating right now, that I think we could maybe see as the opportunity to bring those perspectives and tear down a bit of barriers. So maybe that's directed to you, Peter, and the UN system, but just an idea.
All right. I realize this is like throwing a curveball. That's not the intention, because we are here in the climate negotiations. And, the Ocean Pavilion came into existence because we believed that ocean has a big role to play in climate stabilization. And then the immediate question was, what is it specifically that you want it to be done? And then it's not easy answer. I mean, there are some easy ones, but then it's a very complicated one in terms of converting that into NDC. So I'm not suggesting that it is an easy answer, but any reflections that other panelists would have might be helpful to the audience.
Yeah, I'm not an ocean specialist, but I work with more with freshwater, and maybe some of the points for the freshwater community to move forward with NDCs could also be relevant for the ocean. Actually, CIV's CIV and UNDP Water Governance Facility launched a report last year where they assessed 114 non-Annex 1 countries' water integration into the NDCs. And while they saw that there was an increase in mentioning of water and sanitation in the NDCs, the mentionings were usually not paired with concrete actions, which then made it difficult to, if you only mention it but you don't say, okay, what will we do about it? How will we cost it? What is the cost estimate? It's also hard to finance it, and then it's also difficult to implement it. So I think being concrete and specific and doing that difficult work of actually prognosticating the cost for the different actions is super important. Also here, we are at the Finance COP, so it's also relevant to speak about that, of course. And something that also came out, and that is also related to this, was that a lot of the NDCs also lacked water governance structures. This was very, very much lacking from a lot of the NDCs. And this is really needed, because a lot of them mentioned water to be used across different sectors for mitigation, for adaptation, for wash, for food and agriculture, for energy. But it wasn't, a lot of them lacked an assessment of, okay, but if we use water for food in this way, how will that impact water available for drinking or water available for energy and so on? And that's a huge lack, and something we really need to take into account. So yeah, doing that overall assessment of the availability of water and how also I think the ocean impacts fresh water is really important, of course. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, without being an expert on that matter, but just my own knowledge, I think using the oceans as part of the NDCs and knowing that the oceans are the biggest carbon sinks, then I think using that as part for the mitigation measures and how you can use nature to really implement into the NDCs, I think will be a great way to do it. I mean, we just finished COP16, the CVD, and then all the outcomes from there are connected to biodiversity. So your question is, how are we going to address climate? Then let's use nature as well to address that into the NDCs. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
And just to add to that, I mean, everybody's spoken about the NDCs, but of course, mitigation is one aspect of it, but we've also got the adaptations. You've got the NAPs as well are also important. And I think that's also where the source to sea conversation is really important. Because if we're looking at adaptation strategies, we can't just be talking to the people who work in the ocean, because at the end of the day, sea level rise, storm surges, and all these things, they're going to affect the whole catchment. You've got saltwater intrusion into mangroves and into freshwater systems. So yeah, in addition to the mitigation activity, I think also the whole adaptation activity around climate change will also benefit massively from a source to sea approach.
Right. As you remember, Matt, last time in Dubai when we had this conversation, we were fortunate to have Franz Tattenbach, Costa Rican minister, and Costa Rica and France are hosting the UNOC 3, and he suggested at the time that we should bring this matter up before the UNOC 3. And so, given what Ambassador Thompson had said, I think we should really look at the declaration draft that Australia and Cabo Verde had come up with and provide these answers. If not answers, at least our inputs into that. And, so that way at least we'll be making a beginning, in terms of how to connect these two communities, not just freshwater and the ocean, but also climate. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. If you would like to ask any questions or offer a comment, now is the time. Who would like to go first? Yes. If we could get one of these microphones. Thank you.
I don't know whether I've a question or a remark, but maybe share some observations.
Yes.
I think I was quite, it's an open door, triggered by, let's say, approaching the hydraulic circle. Maybe what I was missing in the discussion is who's the owner of the hydraulic circle. And what I'm also missing in the discussion, how to value those elements. And I think when we were able to do that, we divided, let's say, the sea in economic zones, we divided the inland waters in river basins, etc. And we are able, let's say, to address better the ownership and the values of, let's say, the system integration as a whole. I think then we have also some arguments to put in the NDCs and the adaptation plans.
That's a terrific point. I think we should really take that on board, and I think it needs a little bit of thinking and also some provocative argumentation in terms of who owns that and how do we account for it, etc. Any other questions, comments? I mean, I'm sure you have some reflections, if not anything, in the nature of a question. No? Okay, then let me go back to the panel with one question. We have a few more minutes left. For the benefit of our audience here, why don't you tell us how your respective organizations are addressing this issue? Given you're obviously interested in it, you're here last year, and then here you have a separate pavilion. Some detail on how you're doing it. Let's start with Thomas, and then come down this way.
So one of the things we're doing is engaging in the source to sea community or collective, and with following the upstream and downstream effects and down to the ocean shore, so to say. And then, of course, we bring it into the policy work we do, and we bring it into the NDCs and also the NAPs from an adaptation point of view. So thank you, Matthew, for addressing that. But also, very concretely, we're working together with, right now, just to give a concrete example on how we bring and try to test the policies. We're working together with a pharmaceutical global company now to do an upstream, downstream measurement with data, seeing how it influences the fresh water that comes from the source, run down to the sea, and where the usage, where we as consumers spill out the rests of what's leftovers from medicines, from products that we use on our bodies, etc. We know there's a huge amount between 60 to 85% of sunscreen creams, other creams, and etc. that just flushes out into the ocean. So we're trying to do a data-based test pilot to see how can we then influence from the data and the knowledge that we achieve together with this pharmaceutical company and influence the policy. So that's how we work.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think from WaterAid's perspective, we are really raising our ambition when it comes to influencing at national level the different NAPs and NDCs in all the different 26 countries where we work, and that also includes, as I said before, some island countries and some countries that are low-laying, so it also impacts, of course, the ocean and the freshwater and saltwater intrusion and so on. So I think just by engaging in that consultative process with governments, we are engaging with the source to sea spectra or continuum. And also we are, as working with wastewater and sanitation structures as well, I think that's a really case in point. And as you were saying as well, with the medicals of something you can do to protect the oceans. Almost half of all the wastewater worldwide is actually discharged to the ocean without any treatment, even though seagrass beds are really important for carbon sequestration and storage. And they are, 35 times more or faster in sequester carbon than rainforest. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but I think it's interesting, and that is something that we are working with concretely to improve the health of the ocean and the vegetation in the shorelines and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
From our perspective, we have multiple initiatives and projects on the field. We are implementing nature-based solutions, and that's a concept that is all well known, but sometimes it's not coming intrinsically as something natural to do in the business as usual, and that's something that we are really incorporating in our DNA as Van Oord. We're also looking into biodiversity enhancement, and now we have been focused mainly on oceans, and we have an initiative called the Ocean Health, where we are focusing on mangroves and corals and seagrass and shellfish, and so that's how we see it, on that part, on how we can do coastal resilience, but also with biodiversity enhancement. And something else that I can think out, it's about we developed a tool. It's called the Climate Risk Overview, and it's open to all the public to really have these GIAs, and then you have all the world, and you can really map where are all these populations that are in risk of the sea level rise. So by having this type of tools, you facilitate also for the policymakers, for also the academia to know where we can focus and have a more holistic perspective on those areas and all the people that are in risk now, especially on the coastal areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I realise I need to be fairly quick now, so I will try and do that, Rama. So I just want to 3 points in terms of what we're doing very quickly. Firstly, go onto the Plymouth Marine Laboratory website and type in source to sea, because we've made quite a big point of gathering together all the research that we've done that actually crosses over these sectors. I'm not going to bore you by just reading through all the lists of different projects, but just one of them, for instance, is Lost at Sea, where all the tyre particles are going. So we're working with the universities, we're working with industry, we're working with the research, and we're actually monitoring, and Peter mentioned this in his opening remarks, where all the particles are going from tyres. And that means we're working upstream, we're working 15 kilometres inland from the shore, and we're discovering things like up to 100 million metres squared of the UK's river network is at risk of contamination from tyre particles. That sort of research means working across the board. So one of the things we're doing at Plymouth Marine Laboratory is we're bringing in researchers from a wide number of disciplines, like I said, not just working in silos. So that's the research side. The second side, and I just want to mention this, is I chair the UK's National Decade Committee, and actually the UN Decade for Ocean Science does have a Healthy Waters, Healthy Oceans program, and we're trying to reach out through that to the freshwater sector. And then finally, very quickly, I head up the international office, and one thing we haven't got time to talk about really, but this is an amazing issue for science diplomacy, because a lot of these rivers go through multiple countries. Sometimes rivers from one country end up feeding into the coast in another country. So a lot of what we do now is also not just the research, but working in different countries and finding out how we work across these different policy and governance frameworks. I think that's maybe a whole nother session, another time, is science diplomacy and source to sea, but I think that'd be a great session for another time.
Well, that's a great point, Matt, to conclude on. And listening to you and the panel, it is clear to me that we have to do a number of things. One of which is not only taking freshwater to ocean side of it, but taking the ocean side to the freshwater side of it. Point one. And point two, once we have that cumulative knowledge of what it is that we are trying to do, taking that to the climate negotiations and to the biodiversity negotiations, and even the desertification convention, because there are elements of that that we need to really, work with. And then overall, the big point that I take away from the gentleman, the question is, that takes me back to law of the sea negotiations. When the resources of the continental shelf were talked about, landlocked countries said, it is a continental shelf. I'm part of the continent. I don't have a coastline, but the resources on the shelf, there is an argument to be made, something that needs to be further explored as well. But, all of this means in the context of the conferences, Peter Thompson already talked about UNOC 3, but that is not the only one. We have the Our Ocean Conference and, a number of other events coming up. And I think, at a minimum, if this group can come together and then have an ongoing exercise before the conferences, and then be able to advance a set of recommendations, I think that would be a fine way to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all very much for your keen attention, and I want you to join me in thanking our panelists with a big round of applause, and particularly our Ambassador Peter Thompson, who is here. And I would invite him to come and join us in a group photograph of the panel. Peter, if you could kindly come up to the stage. I know you're preparing for the next speech, but